Meanwhile, Iraqi forces continue their offensive against Islamic State militants 3 days after breaking a 6-week siege of the town of Amerli, north of Baghdad. The advance came as Amnesty International accused the Islamic State of systematic ethnic cleansing and mass killings of minorities, in northern Iraq. Now, joining us live from London is Middle East analyst and commentator Jonathan Sacerdoti. Hopefully I pronounced your surname right, Mr. Sacerdoti.
Hi, good to be with you.
Good to be with you too. How do you think Washington will respond to the Islamic State killing second American journalist Steve Sotlov?
Well, Barack Obama has called it repulsive and barbaric and promised that justice will be served. He said that Washington's aim was to destroy ISIS. This is, of course, the second beheading of an American journalist, something that will be testing his resolve and challenging his decision to keep airstrikes limited for the time being. A YouGov poll after that first execution found that 63% of Americans would now support strikes against ISIS on Syria, compared with just 13% a year ago. But just last week, Obama was mocked for his declaration that we do not have a strategy yet. Many argued that showed his weakness and indecision. So whatever he does next will have to be designed to challenge that perception both at home and Iraq and Syria. He's got to act decisively and strategically to prevent ISIS from wreaking more havoc in the region, beheading and crucifying people along the way. And we can only really wait and see if and how he'll deliver on that.
The next hostage to be killed by the IS is from Britain. What's the British take on the situation?
There's a fairly unified front across the political spectrum here, and the Prime Minister and Ed Miliband, the leader of the opposition, both condemned, obviously, these continued events in the region, both speaking out about the barbarism of these beheading videos. This, of course, doesn't affect their resolve not to give in to terrorist acts like this, but there is shock that these killings appear to be taking place also at the hands of a British accented killer, and that has of course highlighted the issue here of the 500 or so fighters believed to have left the UK, travelled from the UK, British citizens, to go and fight with ISIS and similar forces in the region. There is also fear, of course, that those people will come back to the United Kingdom with their training and with their fundamentalist Islamist ideology, posing, of course, a security threat here at home, threat of terrorism. So the Prime Minister announced measures he wished to take in order to limit their movements here, even saying that he would like to be able to remove their passports and citizenship, something, however, that his coalition partners, the Liberal Democrats, were against, and also might be illegal internationally if this leaves people stateless. So here they are still also working out exactly what policy should be in relation to the events happening with ISIS.
Turning to the Amerli breakthrough at the moment, is it safe to say that this week's Amerli breakthrough became the biggest offensive success for the Iraqi government since the Islamic State militants started making major gains in Iraq in June?
Yes, well, Amerli is a small region that many people won't have heard of before, located just 160 kilometers north of Baghdad, near Salahuddin, and it was besieged by ISIS terrorists for 84 days. Most of its 12,000 citizens are Shiite Turkmen who ISIS threatened with death and subjected to hunger and humiliation. That region was completely surrounded with the terrorists, cutting off supplies of water and food and medications. So the Amerli breakthrough is more or less the only time that Iraqi forces have won a significant victory against ISIS since it took over Mosul, Tikrit, and most of the western Iraq, even with strong support from the US and others. Yes, you could say that it is, of course, an important breakthrough in terms of that.
So will the Amerli breakthrough actually weaken the positions of the Islamic State militants?
This operation saw a successful coming together of various forces. So, as I said, it was a strong signal that Iraqi government forces, Shia militias and Kurdish Peshmerga, acting in concert with the US strikes and, of course, aid strikes dropped by British, French and Australian aircraft. This has shown perhaps a new way or a good model for further intervention, further battling against ISIS. And so, as well as the Iraqi planes paving the way somewhat for these forces, so did the US planes, and it shows that this joined-up effort might indeed help weaken the position of ISIS or Islamic State in the future. This might be a pointer to how things could go in the future. And, of course, Obama has now authorized the Department of Defense to fulfill a Department of State request for approximately 350 additional U.S. military personnel, still maintaining, though, that their mission is to protect U.S. diplomatic facilities and personnel in Baghdad, so maintaining that the U.S. isn't getting further involved.
We're not going to see any more abductions, you think, in the near future, or could that be a real case scenario?
More killings, you mean, of Western or U.S. journalists?
Both, actually.
Well, certainly there are other journalists and people who are kidnapped, missing, or known to be imprisoned, and ISIS is either responsible for some of those kidnaps or has bought those prisoners from other groups, and they will continue to threaten those people. They will continue, as they have now, with this British person who is said to be next on their list. They said, of course, here in Britain, it's been requested that he not be named. His family is said to be in Scotland, but there's been the request that he should not be named. So we don't know his name publicly, but there are more people who they could behead. This is not something they're doing lightly. They know the impact of what they're doing, and this is often a technique used by Islamist groups in the region in order to draw in the West into their war. It's something they think is provocative and know reflects badly and will provoke a popular opinion, if not a governmental opinion, to perhaps put more pressure for the West to get involved in the war against ISIS.
Very shortly, what should journalists working in the region do to prevent being abducted?
Well, at this stage, it's clear that working in that region presents a huge risk to journalists. Often journalists covering wars and in challenging places do know the threats they're up against. But right now, the best advice really is that it's not a safe place to be covering these wars. It's not a safe place to be at the moment for fear of these kidnappings and these murders, which are used as public propaganda. So, of course, journalists have always braved certain conditions in order to report on war, but right now most good advice is that they should not be in the region even to report on this, but all the usual warnings go along with the job, that they need to be cautious about who their fixers are, where they're going, what they're doing, and generally take care.
Thank you very much. That was Middle East analyst and commentator Jonathan Sacerdoti.
The threat of Islamic extremism to the UK...